You perhaps heard the term the smoking gun. That's usually some piece of evidence that really puts the target on the suspect. Well, today we're going to tell you about Chad Daybell's smoking shovel. That's right, he's called the Gravedigger, and I want to tell you how his smoking shovel got him caught. This and more on today's episode of Charlie Crimebuster. It's what some people are calling, they're calling it the fastest minutes in podcasting.
The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the individuals interviewed and participating in this show and do not represent those of Charlie Crimebuster nor Peacemaker Network. All individuals described or mentioned in the podcast should be considered innocent until found guilty in a court of law. This podcast contains subject matter such as violence and graphic descriptions which may not be suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
Well, hello and welcome to another episode of Charlie Crimebuster. So glad to have you on the Charlie Crime train today. Hey, we're continuing our series on Chad Daybell. April the 1st, that's when they start to pick the jury in the trial. And remember, a little different from Lori's particular trial. On this trial, the death penalty is there. That's right, Lori's, it was taken off the table, but here it's on the table. So it's an important trial indeed. But first, I want to thank you for becoming a part of the Charlie Crime train. Every week we have new listeners, and the thousands of downloads, they humble us from all of you that are listening to our series. I hope that we're giving you information that will help you get ready for this coming trial. Hey, if you are a new listener or you're a seasoned listener, I want to invite you to reach out with a shout out. That's right, reach out with a shout out. You can reach me, Charlie Crimebuster at gmail.com. Charlie Crimebuster at gmail.com. And as always, if you'd like to support the program, go on over to peacemakernetwork.com. Peacemakernetwork.com. You're going to read there how you can become a part of the Charlie Crime train. For as little as $3 a month, you become a badge, BADGE supporter. And you not only support the program, but you help us support the men and women of law enforcement, the first responders out there, and of course, the brave men and women of the military. We always call those people the people that run toward danger, not away from danger. That's peacemakernetwork.com. Now, a lot of people are very fascinated with this case, and we have done a whole lot of work and research on the case. You can go to charliecrimebuster.com, and there you'll find a whole bunch of episodes, including episodes about this case that we're looking at today. So, again, thank you for becoming a part of the crime family today, and stay on board. We're getting ready to take you for a ride indeed. Now today, and getting ready for the coming trial, I'm going to be sharing with you some information to get you up to speed and ready for this trial of Chad Daybell. Now, Chad Daybell is accused of criminal conspiracy, first-degree murder, and insurance fraud. All these, by the way, are felony offenses, and they go back to around 2018, 2019. At least that's what the court records show. And by the way, he has pleaded not guilty to each count. Now, these charges do come from the deaths of Vallow's youngest children, JJ and Tylee, and Chad Daybell's first wife, Tammy Daybell. And in order to help you understand this trial better, it is very, very critical that you understand about the twisted theology that Chad had taught his small band of followers. I guess you would call this his beyond the veil false teaching. Now, be very, very careful and don't be guilty of placing all believers in the same category as Chad and Lori. In fact, true believers will be the very first to tell you that Jesus Christ warned his followers to be alert of so-called false teachings. And he also warned them about wolves that appear to you in sheep's clothing. In other words, he warned his followers to be aware of people just like Chad Daybell. Now, Chad Daybell's teachings at the beginning, did not really lead this duo of death, I guess, to the alleged murders that they now have conspired to commit. In fact, at first, it was just kind of a seed that Chad Daybell planted that he had actually lived on earth in earlier times. In fact, he went as far as saying that he was on earth when Jesus Christ walked the earth. Then he went on to say, as he added to this, that he and Lori, now his new wife, but they had been married in another life, way beyond this time. Now, you see, this was important, because if he could plant that seed that they had already been married in an earlier life, well, then both of them could justify their own affair, even though they were married to separate people. That's right, they were committing adultery, and yet they had to somehow justify that. So justification is, hey, we lived in an earlier life. We were already married, you see, to each other. But as you see all along, he will use this warped theology always to better himself. Now, next, he and Lori, they duped, I guess, one another to believe that they both had been chosen to lead the people of God in the end of the world, which, by the way, according to them, was to end, well, a couple of years ago now, but they were saying that it was going to happen just a few months coming. So they had special work to do, and they alone had been appointed as the leaders of this group of believers to survive the tribulation of the end of times. Now, my friend, here's where it gets tricky and, unfortunately, deadly. In order to lead this group, they must remove obstacles that would keep them from their leadership role. And they also had to somehow get financing for their plans. So, ask yourself, what is keeping them from their goal? Well, unfortunately, it's people. And how will they finance their plans? Well, through other people's money. Now, when I talk about obstacles, I'm talking about their spouses and, unfortunately, their children. And when talking about money, I'm talking about life insurance on the spouses. But there was just one big problem, you see. Now, how could these so-called spiritual leaders, religious leaders, how could they justify getting rid of this obstacle? Well, enter another one of Chad's warped and devious teachings. You see, he said that he had the gift of determining when people were invaded by an evil spirit. He was actually, as he said to his followers, able to determine through a scale of darkness when people went so far down the scale they would actually become demon-possessed and would literally be zombies walking the earth. Yep, and when they became dark, well, they were either entirely taken over by an evil spirit, and the only way to escape that, yep, you guessed it, by death. You see where we're going now, don't you? You see, this becomes justification for taking another person's life. If you take their life, not only would they get rid of the evil spirit, but you would set their soul free to live with God. Oh, my friend, I tell you, this is evil teaching indeed. It is as false teachings will ever get. And it is a belief system that propelled this duo of death into the very dark areas that they went. And not only did they become a duo of death, but it became a trio of death, as you will see. And in just a moment, I'm going to introduce you to the dark souls that Chad identified. But right now, it is time for Charlie Crimebuster's Crazy Crook of the Week. You see, we tell a crazy crook story to kind of lighten the load of the dark things that we share on this podcast. So right now, it's time for Charlie Crimebuster's Crazy Crook Story of the Week. Our crazy crook story today involves a burglar, a suspect, who actually had a tattoo that said, "All gas, no brakes." You see, this serial car theft, well, he was caught after failing to hit the brakes and stop without crashing. Well, according to this report, police responded to the reports of a couple seen attempting to break into a few different cars in the neighborhood around 3 a.m. When an officer arrived, they attempted a traffic stop. The car sped off deeper into the subdivision, though, and unknown to this dumb couple, there was only one way in and one way out of that subdivision. Well, the couple ended up driving around at high speeds, trying to dodge the officers, trying to find a way out, but they never found an exit. Instead, they crashed into a parked car at high speed. By the way, that was all captured on neighborhood cameras. And officers easily got the two suspects out of the disabled car, secured them while EMTs came to assist with injuries. That driver was identified as 37-year-old Timothy Allen Hogue, who also confessed to many of the burglaries. Well, he's facing a ton of charges. The woman involved, she's still in the hospital, recovering from injuries, and charges are pending. So, my friend, our crazy quick story of the week involves a burglar with a tattoo that said all gas and no brakes. And yet, he didn't use his brakes, but he did crash into a parked car. This is indeed Charlie Crimebuster's Crazy Crook of the Week. Now back to our main focus. Sometime in 2018, Lori met Chad Daybell and spent time with him away from her own family. Now, one of her friends said these words about her. Said that Lori was a fan of his writing, and when she actually got to talk with him, it just kind of escalated from there. You see, Lori started doing podcasts with Daybell, began telling people she was a supernatural being appointed by God to lead the 144,000 chosen into the millennium. She also believed that she had been appointed another, more dark role. That's what Raymond said, April Raymond. He said that part of her mission on earth was to eliminate the darkness, the demonic, the evil. And April Raymond said Lori told her one of those evil beings was her own husband, Charles Vallow. He went on to say the way she had explained it to me about Charles was that Charles was already dead, that there was a demon living inside him. And the officer went on to question Richard about it, said, what did she say yesterday? And that was what he asked, actually, Charles. Charles Vallow said to the police officer, she said, you're not Charles. I don't know who you are, what you did with Charles. Well, Vallow, her husband, was so spooked by what Lori was saying about him going dark and that he wasn't himself anymore, he was so spooked that he went to the police. And that conversation was actually recorded on an officer's body cam. Here's what Charles Vallow said on that body cam. She thinks she's a resurrected being and a god. And he was worried about his safety and the safety of his children. So the officer says, what makes her a danger to herself and others? And then Charles Vallow says, she threatened me, murder me, kill me. Again, the officer asked, she threatened to murder you? And Charles Vallow said, yes. Now, what took place after that, we're going to tell you a little later. But so the first person that went dark during this time was Charles Vallow. He was concerned about it. He was even in fear of his life. He even reported it to the police. Now, the next person to go dark in this deal of death was a guy who was not a spouse or a child, and many of you may not have heard of him, but he is the husband of a niece of Lori Vallow. His name, Brandon Borto. He was married to Melanie Borto. Now, he never really went in for the strange teachings of Chad Daybell, and conveniently to this duo of death, he was also described by Chad Daybell as going dark. Now, very interesting things will come out in Lori's trial about this guy, Brandon Borto, who went dark. Then next, unfortunately, we have little JJ and Tylee, who were under Lori Daybell's care. These precious children who caught the attention of the world when they went missing. However, it is evident now that once again, the duo of death, they used their scale of death of people going dark to attach it to these children as well. Well, the next person to go dark, of course, is Tammy Daybell, the wife of Chad Daybell. You see, he said, of course, with pretended sadness in his voice, he announced that now his own wife was going dark as well. Isn't this convenient? Both spouses of this couple that's in an affair are suddenly going dark. Now, I might also state that the detectives that were closing in on this duo of death while looking for the missing children, they were also pronounced going dark. Luckily for them, they didn't face the same thing that these other people that were pronounced dark faced. So these dark souls, Charles Vallow, her niece's husband Brandon, the two children, JJ and Tylee, and of course, Chad's wife Tammy, all pronounced going dark. Now next will come the murders, the alleged murders, I guess I should say. And we're going to get you caught up on that in just a moment. But now it's time for us to give you more news that you can use. And that is with our Charlie Scam Alert. So here, my friend, is James Buckman, our great producer, with our Scam Alert of the week.
Thank you, Charlie Crumbuster. This week's Scam Alert comes directly from the Social Security Administration, and they want you to be aware of what are Social Security-related scams. You see, criminals continue to impersonate the Social Security Administration and other government agencies in an attempt to obtain personal information or even money. The scammers might call, they might email, text, write, or even message you on social media claiming to be from the Social Security Administration or from the Office of the Inspector General. They might use the name of a person who actually really works there, and they might even send a picture as attached as proof. Social Security employees do contact the public by telephone for business purposes. And ordinarily, the agency calls people who have recently applied for a Social Security benefit or are already receiving payments and require an update on their record, or may have requested a phone call from the agency. Well, if there is a problem with the person's Social Security number or record, the Social Security will typically mail a letter. So here's the 4 basic signs of a scam. First of all, they'll pretend to be from an agency or an organization you know to gain your trust. Number 2, the scammers may say that there is a problem, or maybe even they're offering a prize. And number 3, they pressure you to act immediately. They say there's an urgency, and they pressure you. Number 4, the scammers may tell you to pay in a specific way. Now, here's what the Social Security Administration will never do. They will never threaten you. They will never suspend your Social Security number. They will never say that they need personal information or payment. They will never pressure you to take immediate action. They will not ask you to pay with gift cards or prepaid debit cards or wire transfers, cryptocurrency, or even mail cash. They'll never threaten to seize your bank account or even offer to move your money to a protected bank account. They will never demand secrecy, and they will never direct message you on social media. So you need to be skeptical and watch for those red flags. So how do you avoid a scam? Number 1, remain calm. Number 2, hang up or ignore the message. Number 3, protect your money. Number 4, protect your personal information. Number 5, spread the word. And number 6, report the scam. At Charlie Crumbuster, we strive to keep you safe.
Thank you, James, for these timely alerts. Now let's talk about the tragic murders of these so-called dark souls. It is apparent now through the investigation that Chad and Lori have enlisted into their twisted evil plot, disguised as religion, this plot is, her own brother Alex Cox as their spiritual hitman. Now, he had already come to her side to assist in one of her previous husband's custody battle. He assisted her by shooting him with a stun gun and then threatening to kill him, all for Lori and her custody battle at a time. But now, my friend, he's now enlisted as the spiritual hitman to get rid of these dark souls. So let's talk about the murders. Number 1. Remember we told you about Charles Vallow going dark? Well, he was coming to get his adopted son, JJ, when, according to Lori and her brother Alex Cox, there was an altercation. And that altercation occurred when Charles came at Alex with a baseball bat. And Alex shot and killed him, all in self-defense, as they claimed. Looked like they were going to get away with it, but then investigators took another look at it. And they find now that Lori Vallow's husband actually lay mortally wounded on the floor of her home for 43 minutes before anyone called 911. Now here's what really happened according to the investigators. Around 7:35 a.m. on July the 11th, Charles Vallow arrives at the Arizona home of his estranged wife to pick up their 7-year-old son. Cox is also at the house, as is Lori Vallow's 17-year-old daughter, Tylee Ryan. At 7:49, Lori takes her husband's rental car, the one that he drove in to pick up his own son with. She takes his own rental car and mobile phone and leaves the house. In the hour that she's gone, well, she goes out and stops at Walgreens and Burger King. But around 7:49, Charles Vallow is shot inside the home. Now, an autopsy, get this, indicates he was shot once in the chest as he was standing, but get this, a second time when he was on the floor. In other words, he stood right over him and shot him again while he was already on the floor. Now, at 8:32, Cox then calls 911 to report a shooting. He claims it just happened, but that's 43 minutes later. He's given instructions for performing CPR, and he indicates that he is attempting those life-saving measures. Just before 8:40, paramedics, police arrive. Police say physical evidence indicated Cox did not attempt CPR on the dying man. 8:48, Lori returns home. She tells police she left the house with her children. She heard a shot. Her brother, however, told the police that she had already left when he fired the gun, so there's some discrepancy there. You see, my friend, no doubt about it, this was just a murder all set up in advance. She already planned it out. They took him out because he had a dark soul. Now, the next dark soul to place the spiritual hitman, well, he was somewhat lucky in that the shot missed. His name is Brandon Bordeaux. You see, he was asking too many questions about Lori's missing children, and he was also declared going dark by Chad Daybell. Now, based on evidence, according to the investigation, they believe that Alex Cox, Lori's brother, drove a green Jeep Wrangler from Rexburg, fired a single shot at Bordeaux and missed. He then drove back to Idaho. Now, my friend, unfortunately, Cox will not face charges because he died in his home from what appeared to be natural causes. Now, in the 48 hours leading up to that shooting on September the 30th, Lori made a search tied to her Gmail account. And 37 hours before the attempted murder, a green Jeep Wrangler registered to Charles Vallow, Lori's husband, was spotted by a license plate reader driving southbound near the area where the shooting took place. And about 11 hours of driving, Jeep was spotted again near Holbrook, Arizona, which is about 3 hours northeast of that place. And twice that morning, Alex and Chad made calls between their burner phones. They had burner phones. That says a whole lot about it, right? So on October the 2nd, Cox's phone searched for directions to Bordeaux's address. And shortly after 7 a.m., Cox then drove to the address in the Jeep, stayed outside of the home, waited for Bordeaux to get back from dropping his kids off, and there was that attempted murder where Bordeaux said when he returned around 9:14, he saw the black window of a Jeep open up and the muzzle of a gun pointed toward him as the gun was fired. And the bullet hit the front driver's side door. Lucky for Brandon, Alex is a bad shot. So there is the second dark person attempted murder. And then the most disturbing of all. We now know that Lori's children, JJ and Tylee, did not just go missing. They were both murdered. Their graves were found by good old detective work. They followed the path of the spiritual hitman Alex Cox by tracing his phone, and they found him on Chad Daybell's land just after the children were last seen, near a pet cemetery on the property. And my friend, a search of that property found the graves of these precious children, and the way that they were buried and the way their bodies were treated is so horrible, I'm not even going to attempt to describe it on this podcast. But there again are two other people that were gone dark on Chad and Lori's scale of darkness. But last but not least is, of course, the murder of Chad's wife, Tammy. Now, at first, it was reported that she simply died in her sleep, despite the fact that she was healthy. She was even planning to run a marathon. However, After taking another look at this death, investigators have now determined two things. One, that the spiritual hitman Alex Cox attempted first to shoot her and missed. That's right, even before her death. You see, the hitman, it appears, wasn't that good of a shooter. He missed with Brandon, and he also missed with Tammy. However, Brandon was fortunate in that this trio of death did not take another go at him. But they did take another go at Tammy. And even though the shooter missed trying to shoot her earlier, they did succeed because after they exhumed her body, they first said she died of natural causes, but now they know that Tammy was murdered. And they also know that Alex Cox was in the area at the same time. So there you have it. 5 people gone dark, according to Chad Daybell's scale of darkness. 4 of them allegedly killed by this trio of death. And while the duo death of Lori, who has already been found guilty, spends the rest of her life in prison, Chad is now facing trial and is facing the death penalty. What do you think? Do you think that he will get it? In just a moment now, I'm going to tell you about the smoking shovel that really shows Chad is complicit in these murders. Before I do that, though, I want to let you know that if you want to get caught up on all of this activity of this whole terrible, terrible situation, then I invite you to go to charliecrimebuster.com, charliecrimebuster.com. You'll find a whole group of podcasts, episodes about this whole situation, all of this trial that's leading up on April the 1st. You even find podcasts where we were actually covering this story before the children were ever found, while they were declared missing. You can read all about it, and you can hear all about it. Go to charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. Now let's talk about what I call the smoking shovel. Oftentimes, it's called a smoking gun, a piece of evidence that really puts the blame on the suspect. While authorities were searching the property of Chad Daybell for the second time this time, there was a phone call that was recorded. You know, when you call the prison or the jail, those calls are always recorded. And so this phone call was recorded when Chad called to Lori, who was in jail at that time. They hadn't found the bodies of the children at that time. So Chad is talking to Lori, and he tells her in a very sad tone, they're looking on the property. And you can tell he's very concerned that they're going to find the bodies. Now, why is he concerned they're going to find the bodies? Because he knew exactly what took place. Because at the same time that Alex Cox was there on Chad's property burying those children, Chad also made a phone call to his wife. And in that phone call, he told her that he was down by the pet cemetery picking up rubbish and burning rubbish. Now that's interesting because part of these bodies had been burned. Secondly, he told his wife that there was a raccoon or groundhog or some sort of varmint that he actually shot and buried on the property. Now the reason he told his wife that is what I call a consciousness of guilt. He told his wife that because if his wife came back and saw that there had been a fire at the pet cemetery, she'd want to know why. Well, he wasn't going to tell her that, well, we were actually burning the bodies of Lori's children. And if she saw that the ground had been disturbed where they had been buried, she would want to know why. And so he made up the excuse about the raccoon or the groundhog or something that he saw that he shot and he had to bury on the property. My friend, that in itself lets us know that he knew exactly what Alex Cox was doing, that he was explicit in what Alex Cox was doing, that he was a part of the conspiracy to kill these precious children. And from other information, we know that he was a part of it all. He was a part of Charles Vallow, because even after Vallow was shot, he indicated to the funeral home director that he was a cousin of Charles Vallow. He wasn't. He just wanted to get those ashes as quick as he could before any evidence could be found otherwise. And he was involved in that. So he was involved in Charles Vallow's death. He was involved in the attempted murder of Brandon Bordeaux. He was involved in the murder of Lori's children. And we know he was involved in the murder of his own wife. Now I'm supposed to say allegedly, so I'll say allegedly. But my friend, you're going to find the evidence will prove that he was there all the time. Well, I guess the only thing I have a question about the trial is whether he's going to really get the death penalty or not. I believe without a shadow of a doubt there is far enough evidence to convict him. So let's you and I, we'll take a listen this next week. They're going to start picking the jury April the 1st. We're going to hear a lot of things about this trial that will both make you frustrated and mad for sure. How could anybody stoop so low to take the lives of precious children and other people who are innocent? So, until this time, next time, this is Charlie Crimebuster saying to you, be safe, be alert. For the life you save, it may be your very own.
You have been listening to Charlie Crimebuster. You can find additional podcasts at charliecrimebuster.com. You can also support our first responders, military, and law enforcement communities at peacemakernetwork.com. If you would like to make suggestions for future podcasts, please send your ideas to charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. That's charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. Thank you for joining us today, and we hope that you will join us next week for another exciting crime story with Charlie Crimebuster.